It was a night unlike any other at Swedish American Hospital. A fierce storm had descended upon Rockford, Illinois, and the streets outside were swallowed by sheets of rain. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above the emergency room, casting long, harsh shadows across the sterile hallways. Inside, Jenny Joseph, a dedicated neonatal nurse, was finishing up her shift, preparing herself for yet another night surrounded by fragile lives. She'd seen it all after 23 years of service. The heartbreak, the miracles, the moments of grace. But nothing could have prepared her for what happened that stormy April evening in 2004. As Jenny hurried toward the emergency department, a sudden movement caught her eye. Through the glass doors, she saw it, a trail of dark puddles leading from the entrance to the reception desk. And then, an eerie, low whine broke the silence, a sound that sent a chill through her spine. Jenny rounded the corner and froze. Standing there, soaked to the bone, yet strangely still, was a German shepherd in worn military gear. His intense brown eyes locked onto hers, and in his mouth, carefully held between his teeth, was a battered shoebox. It was soaked through with rain, barely holding together. "Ma'am," the security guard's voice was shaky. "This dog, it won't let anyone near it except to call for you. It's out a tag, pointing to your name on the NICU roster." Jenny's heart skipped a beat. She had seen some unusual things in her career, but nothing like this. She knelt slowly, her hands trembling, as she approached the dog. The moment she did, Max, the military dog that had served alongside Staff Sergeant Thomas Wilson, dropped the box gently at her feet and nudged it forward with his nose. The faint sound of a baby's cry echoed from within the box. Jenny's breath caught in her throat. Inside the box, barely moving, was a newborn baby. The infant, wrapped in a dish towel, was cold to the touch and struggling to breathe. Jenny's years of experience kicked in as she instinctively moved to wrap the baby in a warm blanket, but her eyes never left Max. He was standing guard, as though waiting for her approval, his eyes locked on the door. Before she could fully comprehend what had just happened, the team around her sprang into action. The baby's condition was critical. His tiny body weighed no more than 3 pounds, and he was suffering from severe hypothermia. But it was clear to Jenny that the baby wasn't the only one in need of help. Max, the military dog who had pulled survivors from rubble in Afghanistan, was still standing at attention by the door, as if knowing his mission was far from over. He had carried the infant through the storm, ensuring the child's survival. Jenny's mind raced. How had this dog known to come here, to find her? She turned to the nurse beside her, her voice steady. "Get the NICU team here, stat. This baby's fighting for his life." The storm outside raged on, but inside Swedish American Hospital, a miracle was unfolding. Jenny couldn't have known that this was just the beginning of a life-changing journey for the Wilson family, for Max, and for a tiny baby named Alan. Welcome to HeartForce, where you and I find more meaning in life through stories about dogs. Before we continue, please comment below and let us know where you are listening to this video from. And if you have any stories about your dog, feel free to share them with everyone. The storm outside was relentless, and every drop of rain that hit the pavement seemed to echo the weight of what had just transpired. Max, though soaked to the bone, remained still by the emergency room doors, his military vest clinging to his form, and his loyal eyes unwavering. There was something almost human in his gaze as he watched Jenny and the medical team work frantically around the tiny infant he had carried through the night. Jenny knew it was a miracle the baby had survived. The cold, the exposure, the rough treatment of being carried in a shoebox. None of it should have ended like this. Yet, somehow, the baby was alive. As she carefully placed him in the warming incubator, she looked back at Max, who had been standing guard by the door the entire time. His job, however, wasn't over. Outside, the rain continued to fall in torrents, and Max's eyes never left the hospital doors. His loyalty and instinct had led him here. But what was it that kept him vigilant? Jenny had heard stories of military dogs who had saved lives in the most extraordinary ways, but nothing quite like this. This wasn't just a job for Max. This was personal. As if waiting for something more to happen, Max remained rooted to his spot, his body tense, his ears alert. It was almost as if he was protecting not just the baby, but something else, something more. Max's story had begun long before this stormy night. 7 years prior, he had been an integral part of the K-9 search and rescue unit, serving with Staff Sergeant Thomas Wilson. They had faced countless dangers together, pulling survivors from rubble in war-torn Afghanistan, locating missing soldiers, and performing rescues in the most hostile conditions. Thomas often said that Max wasn't just trained, he had an almost supernatural sense for human suffering. But that had all changed in late 2003. In the midst of a routine search near Kandahar, Thomas had stepped on an IED. His last words to Max were simple yet profound. "Stay back, boy. Stay safe." But Max, the brave German shepherd, refused to leave his fallen handler's side. When he was found 3 days later, it wasn't just his body that had been broken. Max's spirit had been shattered as well. The trauma of losing Thomas had changed him. He had retreated into himself, unwilling to work with anyone else. Months of rehabilitation attempts proved futile, and Max was honorably discharged from the service. The dog that had once been fearless and unshakable was now a shadow of his former self. But it wasn't the end for Max. He was sent to Hope's Haven, a sanctuary for retired military dogs in Rockford, Illinois. And it was there, at the very place where Max found his next purpose, that his path would cross with Jenny's once again. Jenny had been working in Swedish American Hospital's NICU for over 2 decades. She had earned a reputation for taking on the most difficult cases, those babies who had no chance at life, those that others had given up on. She became known as the Night Angel, always volunteering for the overnight shifts, believing that mothers and babies needed her the most in the quiet of the night. But her strength had been forged through pain. 10 years earlier, Jenny had lost her own pregnancy at 23 weeks. It was a loss that changed her forever, turning her grief into purpose. She never took a case lightly, always treating every infant like her own child. Her connection to the military was personal as well. Her father had been a medic in Vietnam, and it was his stories of battlefield medicine that had inspired her to pursue a career in neonatal care. She had carried those stories with her, shaping her into the woman she had become. When she heard about Max, she felt a strange pull. She knew his story, the heroic rescues, the bond with Thomas Wilson. But she also knew that Max had suffered, just as she had. His story resonated with her on a deep level. As the storm raged on that night, Jenny stood in the hospital hallway, looking at Max through the glass doors. He was still standing there, motionless, watching as the team worked to stabilize the baby. He was waiting, and Jenny couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for her. She approached him slowly, her footsteps echoing through the quiet hospital. The connection between them was instantaneous. It wasn't just the shared history of military service or the bond between a nurse and a dog. It was something more. Max had carried that baby through the storm, and now he was waiting for Jenny to complete the mission. "Good boy, Max," Jenny whispered, reaching out to stroke his fur. "You've done your part." Max gave a soft wag of his tail, his eyes never leaving the entrance. Jenny knelt down beside him and rested a hand on his head, her fingers brushing the worn dog tags around his neck. There was a sense of duty about him, a loyalty that transcended his service years and the trauma he had endured. It wasn't just the military training. Max was following a call, a mission that had begun long before this night. Little did Jenny know, Max wasn't just guarding the hospital. He was guarding something much more precious, the future of a family, a legacy of service, and a promise made by a father to protect his daughter, even from beyond the grave. Max's vigil continued into the early hours of the morning. The storm had not let up, its fury echoing against the hospital windows. Jenny, exhausted but focused, couldn't help but steal a glance at the German shepherd standing watch by the NICU door. There was something otherworldly in the way Max held himself, a quiet strength that filled the room even when the chaos of the emergency room buzzed around him. For hours, Max had remained alert, steadfastly guarding the door, never straying far from the baby's side. The hospital staff had come to respect him offering him water and blankets, but he refused to rest. His presence was a constant reminder that there was something much larger at play here, a bond, a mission that transcended time and circumstance. It wasn't until the early morning that Jenny was able to sit with Max for a moment of quiet. She walked into the waiting room, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, but her mind still racing. She sat beside Max, placing her hand gently on his ruffled fur. The dog didn't flinch, as if he was used to this comforting touch, the connection that ran deeper than simple companionship. "I know you've been through a lot, Max," she murmured softly, her voice barely audible over the sound of the storm outside. "But this isn't over yet. We have more work to do." The words felt strangely prophetic. Jenny's phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out her thoughts. It was a text from her colleague, Dr. Walsh, the senior neonatologist. "The baby is stable for now, but it's a long road ahead. I'll need you to stay with him for the next few hours." Jenny sighed, the weight of her responsibility settling in. "I'll be there in a minute," she replied, but her gaze remained fixed on Max. His eyes met hers, and in that silent exchange, she knew they were both waiting for something more. What exactly, she wasn't sure, but they were both a part of something far larger than themselves. Meanwhile, the storm outside showed no sign of relenting. The streets of Rockford had become treacherous, a battleground of nature's fury. The local authorities had issued warnings, and emergency responders were on high alert. Yet, through it all, Max had not faltered. He had seen the worst of human suffering, experienced the horrors of war, and had come out on the other side stronger for it. Now, he stood as the final guardian of a little boy's life. Back at the hospital, the NICU staff continued to work tirelessly on the baby. His vitals were improving, but he wasn't out of the woods yet. Each breath was a fight, and every second counted. Jenny had seen this kind of fragility before, newborns teetering on the edge of life. But there was something different about this child, something that made her believe that he was meant for more than just survival. Jenny couldn't shake the feeling that this baby had been sent here for a reason. But why? Why had Max, this extraordinary dog, been the one to find him? As she prepared to leave the waiting room, Jenny looked down at Max one last time. "I don't know what's next, but we'll get through this together. You've already done more than most people could ever dream of." Max's tail thumped softly against the floor, his eyes never leaving her as she walked out the door. In the hours that followed, Jenny remained at the baby's side, monitoring his progress. Despite the small victories, though, she couldn't stop thinking about the dog and the strange pull she felt toward him. He wasn't just any dog. Max had been through hell and back with his handler, Sergeant Thomas Wilson. He had carried the weight of that loss with him, and now, against all odds, he had brought a baby into her care. In the early morning light, Jenny finally learned more about Max's past. She had been told that Max had served with Wilson in Afghanistan, that he had been a hero in the most literal sense. But she never knew the full depth of his story until she spoke to the head of Hope's Haven, the sanctuary where Max had been living after his military service. Max had been wounded in both body and spirit. The loss of his handler had irrevocably changed him. He had retreated, refusing to interact with any new handler, consumed by grief. After months of failed rehabilitation attempts, the military had made the decision to retire Max and send him to the sanctuary. But the trauma had never left him. He had withdrawn into himself. Choosing to keep to the perimeter of the sanctuary, his military instincts still sharp, but his heart broken. And then, one day, something shifted. He had picked up a faint cry carried on the wind. A sound so distant, so weak, yet unmistakable. Max, with all his training and instincts, knew immediately what he needed to do. This wasn't just a rescue mission. This was a call to duty, a call to fulfill the promise his fallen handler had made, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Max's actions weren't the result of a trained response alone. They were the culmination of a final order, an order that had been passed down through the years, from Thomas Wilson to his loyal dog. The bond between them was unbreakable, and even in death, Thomas had made sure that Max would always be there to fulfill his duty. His last letter to his family had made that clear. Max had a mission, and he would complete it no matter the cost. And now, here Max was, in the heart of a storm, standing guard over the future of a young mother and a child who was too small to fight for himself. "Thank you, Max," Jenny whispered, as she finally left the NICU to catch a brief moment of rest. "I don't know how we'd have done it without you." Max's story was far from over, but one thing was certain. He was never going to stop fulfilling his duty. The days that followed the storm felt like a blur of shifting roles and tireless efforts. Jenny watched as baby Alan slowly, but steadily, regained strength. Every small victory, his first breath without the need for a ventilator, his temperature stabilizing, was a triumph, but the road ahead was still uncertain. And through it all, there was Max. No one could explain it. How a retired military dog, traumatized by the death of his handler, had become the most dependable guardian of the NICU's most fragile patients. Max was no longer just a hero in the eyes of Jenny. He was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of love, duty, and an unwavering commitment to something larger than oneself. Even after the storm had passed and the rain had subsided, the hospital staff would often find Max standing vigil at the NICU entrance, guarding the babies as if they were his own. Yet, Max's mission wasn't complete. Jenny could feel it in the pit of her stomach. The dog wasn't just waiting for the baby to recover. He was waiting for something else. The atmosphere in the hospital had shifted, and Jenny wasn't the only one who noticed it. The staff began talking about the dog's strange behavior, how he refused to rest, how he kept his eyes trained on the entrance, as if expecting someone to walk through the door. That's when Jenny started piecing together the connection. Max wasn't just waiting for a person. He was waiting for a purpose. It wasn't long before Jenny learned the truth from Hope's Haven. Max's story wasn't just one of military service. It was a story of a final promise made by a father to protect his daughter, even after death. Staff Sergeant Thomas Wilson had foreseen a future where his daughter, Cherish, would need help. He had arranged for Max to be placed in the sanctuary in Rockford, Illinois, knowing that one day, something would happen that would require Max's intervention. The promise to look after his little girl was part of his last will. And so, when Max heard the baby's faint cry that night, it wasn't just the instincts of a military dog kicking in. It was his mission to protect, a promise that had been made years before. Jenny felt the weight of that promise now, knowing that the dog who had carried Alan through the storm was also carrying the weight of a family legacy, one built on love, sacrifice, and the commitment to never leave someone behind. It wasn't long before the hospital staff began to understand that Max was no ordinary service dog. His bond with Alan grew deeper each day. Every time Max entered the NICU, the babies in the wards seemed to calm, their stress levels decreasing. And Max, for the first time since his handler's death, seemed to have found his place again. His military precision was unmistakable, as though every step he took was guided by the same discipline he had learned in the battlefield. But now, he wasn't carrying soldiers to safety. He was guarding a new family. Max's presence brought something unexpected. It wasn't just the calm that spread throughout the NICU when he was around, but a sense of hope. Jenny had seen many babies in distress, and though she had witnessed miracles in her time, there was something different about the connection between Max and Alan. It wasn't just the physical care that helped the baby recover. It was the emotional reassurance Max provided, his loyalty offering the unspoken promise of protection, even in the darkest hours. But the real change came when a young woman named Cherish Wilson walked into the hospital, wearing a worn military jacket, her eyes tired but determined. She hadn't known Max was here. She didn't know that her father's last mission had led her to this moment, that Max had been waiting for her to fulfill her role in this story. Jenny had been by the baby's side when the security guard called her name. Max's behavior had changed instantly. He stood straighter, his eyes locked on the door, as if recognizing the figure in the hallway. It was Cherish. Jenny stepped forward cautiously, her eyes on the dog. She didn't know if this was the moment, the one that Max had been waiting for. But as Cherish stepped into the hospital's lobby, everything seemed to shift. Max, who had never strayed from his post, broke protocol. He slowly walked toward her, his tail wagging. She didn't speak at first. The only sound was the faint rustle of his military vest as Max stood by her side, his body pressing gently against hers. He's been waiting for you," Jenny said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Cherish looked up at Jenny, her eyes wide with disbelief. "My father's dog," she whispered, her voice breaking. He's really here?" Max stood still for a moment, almost as if giving Cherish the time she needed to process what was happening. Then, slowly, he pressed against her leg again, urging her forward. His protective stance was unmistakable. He had completed his mission to bring the baby to safety, and now he was ensuring that the next chapter of this family's healing could begin. In the quiet consultation room, Jenny could see the walls that had stood between Cherish and her family starting to crumble. Cherish had carried a burden of shame, guilt over her unexpected pregnancy, and fear that her family would see her as a disappointment. But in that moment, she realized something profound. She wasn't alone. She never had been. Max had carried not only the weight of a soldier's mission, but the weight of a family's hope for the future. He had been the bridge between a daughter and a mother, between a fallen soldier and his family's future. The weeks that followed were transformative, not just for Cherish and her family, but for everyone who had witnessed Max's incredible journey. What began as a single night of uncertainty, a storm, a dog with a mission, had blossomed into something that transcended even the most extraordinary circumstances. Swedish American Hospital had become the center of a movement, a story that resonated far beyond its walls. And at the heart of it all stood Max, the German shepherd whose loyalty and devotion had changed everything. Cherish had begun to heal, just as baby Alan had. The bond between mother and child grew stronger with each passing day. She had faced unimaginable obstacles, but now she was no longer running from them. She was stepping forward, ready to embrace her new role as a mother. Max remained by her side every step of the way. The hospital staff had integrated him into their daily routine, and he had earned a place not only as a symbol of hope, but as a partner in healing. His calming presence was felt in the NICU, his unwavering discipline and care becoming an integral part of their therapy for infants in distress. Max wasn't just a hero, he had become a living, breathing example of the power of love and loyalty. But even as Max's purpose continued to unfold, there was something else, something Jenny had noticed in the days before the hospital's protocols started to change. Max's movements were becoming slower, his joints aching, and though he never once complained, his energy was waning. The toll of his years of service, both on the battlefield and in the hospital, had begun to catch up with him. Jenny, with her deep understanding of both medicine and the soul, could see it in his eyes. Max was ready for rest, but he wasn't ready to leave. He had one final mission to fulfill. He had brought Alan into the world of life-saving care. He had safeguarded Cherish's future. But now, it was time for him to bring closure to his own story. It was a quiet afternoon when the inevitable came. Max had spent his morning walking between the incubators and the NICU, his tail wagging weakly as he performed his usual rounds. He had greeted every infant, each one more fragile than the next, and had given them his unspoken blessing of protection. His steps were slower now, his body aching, but his eyes, those wise, knowing eyes, remained as sharp as ever. Jenny was by his side, her hand resting on his back. "It's okay, Max," she whispered. "You've done more than enough." Max's ears flicked slightly at the sound of her voice, and his tail wagged once more, though faintly. He had fulfilled his duty to his fallen handler, to the Wilson family, to the little boy who had been saved by his care. But his work was done. He had waited for this moment, and now it was time to rest. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the hospital staff gathered in the NICU. Max, his body exhausted, but his spirit unbroken, lay peacefully on the floor beside Cherish. She was there, just as he had promised his handler. She had become the mother she was meant to be, the protector of Alan's future. "Thank you," Cherish whispered, her fingers gently running through Max's fur. "You've helped me more than you could ever know." Jenny stood nearby, watching the scene unfold. It was a quiet moment, one that felt sacred. In this room, in this moment, Max had given everything for the Wilson family, and in return, they had given him their love, their respect, and their unwavering trust. As Max closed his eyes for the final time, a sense of peace settled over the room. His last breath was a quiet exhale, a soldier's final salute to the family he had sworn to protect. The next day, the hospital held a ceremony in Max's honor. The hallways were lined with those who had been touched by his story, by the bond between man, dog, and family. The Wilson family stood together, a family who had been healed by the very dog that had once been broken. Cherish, standing tall beside her baby, held on to Max's collar, a symbol of the promise that had been fulfilled. Max was buried near the Wilson Memorial Garden, with a bronze statue of him stood as a testament to his service. The plaque beneath it read, "The bravest hearts walk on four legs. The strongest medicine comes wrapped in fur." And as the years passed, the story of Max's devotion, the story of a soldier's promise, will be passed down through generations. It wasn't just a story of a dog who saved a life. It was a story of love, sacrifice, and the unwavering strength that comes when you make a promise and never, ever break it. Max's story is a powerful reminder of the unseen bonds that shape our lives. It teaches us that true service never ends. It transforms, adapts, and continues to protect even when we least expect it. In a world that often feels divided, Max shows us that love and loyalty can bridge any gap, heal any wound, and bring families back together. We are all capable of great acts of love, and sometimes. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you had a dog who has been your guardian? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to HeartForce for more stories that touch your heart.